They say a woman leaves behind her father's house to build a new one, with love, with hope, with dreams. But when I stepped into his house, I wasn't building anything. I was surviving. The wedding was simple, rushed even. No grand celebrations. Just enough rituals to make it legal. He wasn't the romantic type, and I convinced myself that love could come later. After all, I was marrying for safety, not fairy tales. I thought I could earn their love with kindness, win his affection with patience. What a fool I was. On the first morning after the wedding, I woke up early to greet my in-laws with folded hands and a smile. My mother-in-law barely looked up from her cup of tea. "Breakfast is usually ready by now," she said. I blinked. "Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to cook." "Well, who else is going to do it?" she snapped. "We're not running a hotel here." I swallowed my pride and entered the unfamiliar kitchen, trying to remember what my own mother had taught me. I made breakfast. They didn't thank me. They didn't even eat all of it. And just like that, it began. Days turned into weeks. I cooked, cleaned, washed, folded, dusted, served, smiled. My body ached, but I told myself it was temporary. A test. One day they would soften. But I was wrong. I still remember the day I found out I was pregnant. I had stared at the 2 lines on the test with trembling fingers, a bittersweet smile on my lips. I imagined my husband picking me up in his arms, his family doting on me, the house finally warming up with joy. But reality was crueler than imagination. His reaction? A single word. Oh. His mother's? Don't expect special treatment just because you're pregnant. From then on, it got worse. I'd wake up nauseated, lightheaded. I still had to mop the floors. My feet would swell so much I'd limp by evening. If I sat down, I'd hear whispers behind my back. "She's already lazy. Imagine how she'll be once the baby is born." Girls these days, all drama and no strength. And him, my husband, he was always on his phone, always looking away. He'd come home, eat whatever I made without a word, and retreat to the bedroom. He never asked how I was doing, never placed a hand on my stomach, never looked at me like I was carrying his child. One night, after finishing the laundry and throwing up for the 3rd time that day, I finally whispered, "I'm tired." He looked up, annoyed. "Of what?" "Everything," I said. My voice cracked.
He scoffed.
"You women love complaining." My mother worked till the day she gave birth to me. That night, I lay curled on the edge of the bed while he snored beside me. My hand rested on my stomach, whispering to the baby growing inside me, "It's okay. Mama's here. I'll protect you." But inside, I was shattering. Because I wasn't just growing a child. I was growing silence.
Pain.
Loneliness. And in a house full of people, I had never felt more alone. The days blurred together. One long, dragging cycle of morning to night, pain to more pain. The pregnancy app on my phone said I was in the 2nd trimester, the golden phase, they called it. Less nausea, more energy. A visible bump. It showed cartoon babies growing fingers and eyelashes, hearts beating strong. It gave daily reminders to rest, hydrate, eat warm food, and smile. What the app didn't say was what to do when you were expected to cook for 5 people, scrub floors, and smile through passive-aggressive comments about how useless you were becoming. I didn't tell anyone about the cramps. I didn't tell them about the shortness of breath when I stood up too fast. I didn't tell them how I cried in the bathroom, wiping my tears quickly in case someone knocked on the door and called me attention-seeking. I wore anklets so they wouldn't hear how swollen my feet were from the way I dragged them. No one noticed anyway. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen again. The stove was blazing, oil splattering, the pressure cooker hissing like it was about to explode. My mother-in-law shouted from the living room, "Don't forget to soak the lentils for tomorrow." I felt a sharp pull in my lower back. I gripped the counter, breathing through the pain. Sweat trickled down my temple. I looked at the wall clock, 2:47 p.m. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My husband had texted at noon, "Bring my white shirt to the dry cleaner." That shirt. That damn shirt. I had already washed and ironed it, but apparently it wasn't professional enough. Just as I turned off the flame, The nausea hit me like a punch. I ran to the sink heaving. I expected a hand on my back. A question. A voice. Nothing. They pretended not to hear. Maybe they really didn't. I wiped my mouth and turned to see my reflection in the glass cabinet. My eyes were sunken. My skin had lost color. My bump was showing now, not huge, but enough that bending became a chore. And yet no one ever said, "Let me help." I had become a ghost in that house, one who cooked, cleaned, and existed only to serve. That night, I brought it up again. We were in the bedroom, the only place I thought I could speak freely. I stood near the dresser, watching him scroll through reels on his phone. "I need help around house," I said softly. He didn't look up. "So, I'll hire a maid." "We can't afford one right now."
He scoffed.
"Then manage. You've only got one job, stay home. You're not going to work or anything." I stared at him. "I'm carrying your child. And so are millions of women." My voice cracked. "You don't even ask how I feel. Because every time I do, you're either tired or crying. What do you want me to say?" That shut me up. He went back to scrolling. I curled up on the bed and tried to take deep breaths. For the baby. I couldn't break, not yet. Not when something so fragile depended on me to stay strong. But even strength has a limit. And mine was running dangerously thin. I started writing letters. Not to my husband. Not to his mother. Not to anyone in that house. I wrote to my baby. Each night, I'd take out a notebook I had hidden behind the folded shawls in my cupboard. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, the ceiling fan humming above, and write by the dim light of a lamp. "Dear little one," I began. "I don't know if you'll ever read these. But if you do, I want you to know something very important. You are wanted. So very wanted. Even when no one around me seemed happy, I was. Even when I cried alone, it was never because of you. You are the only good thing growing inside me." Some nights, I told my baby about the way my back ached and how my feet felt like balloons. Other nights, I wrote about the sound of the silence between me and their father, how loud it had become. And sometimes I didn't write at all. I just stared at the page, pen in hand, and listened to the sound of my own breathing, proof that I was still here, still surviving. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes, I felt a strange sensation in my belly. A flutter. A tiny tap from the inside, as if someone knocked gently, asking, "Mama? Are you there?" I gasped. My hand flew to my bump. It was you. My baby. Your first kick. Tears filled my eyes. I sat on the floor, cradling my belly, smiling for the first time in weeks. I ran to tell him. Maybe this moment would change something. Maybe he'd smile too. I found him in the living room, watching something on his phone, half listening to his mother complaining about how I burned the rice last night. I stood near the doorway, eyes glowing. The baby kicked. He didn't even look up. "Okay." His mother looked irritated. "Babies kick. It's not a miracle. You people act like you invented childbirth." I walked away without another word. My smile slowly withered. That night I wrote again. "You kicked my love." And Mama smiled. But no one else did. "It's okay. I will smile enough for both of us." Later, I asked him softly, "Do you want to feel the baby kick?" He sighed. "I'm tired." I wanted to scream. I'm tired too. Tired of being invisible. Tired of pretending. Tired of hoping he'd see me. But I didn't scream. I just turned to the wall and held my belly. It was the only place that felt real now. My body was changing, but so was something deeper. My heart. It was cracking in places no one could see. Because the love I thought I had, it was vanishing. Like smoke slipping through my fingers. And every time I felt a kick from inside, I clung to it like a lifeline. Because in a house that didn't want me, at least you did. It started like any other day, gray, heavy, and unforgiving. The house was buzzing with complaints again. The rice wasn't warm enough. The bathroom wasn't cleaned properly. The tea lacked sugar. And somehow it was always my fault. Always.
I was 7 months along by then.
My belly had grown round, tight, and heavy. My back was screaming, my legs felt like wood, and my hands trembled with every movement. But no one noticed. Or cared. That day, I had just come back from the market. I had walked under the scorching sun, carrying 2 heavy bags filled with vegetables, rice, and some toiletries. The auto driver had asked for 5 rupees, more than usual. I gave it. I didn't even argue. When I walked in through the gate, my mother-in-law's first words were, "You forgot to buy salt." I stood there, the plastic bags digging into my fingers, my breath uneven, my belly pulling forward with weight. "I'll get it later," I said, my voice barely audible. She rolled her eyes. "Of course. You always forget something. No common sense." I went straight to the kitchen, dropped the bags, and leaned on the counter. My entire body begged for rest. The fan above didn't help. The sweat clung to my back. I could feel my feet swelling again. That's when she said it, the sentence that broke something deep inside me. "God knows why we agreed to this marriage," she muttered to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. She brought nothing into this house but problems. Something inside me snapped. I turned to her slowly and said, "I brought your grandchild."
She scoffed.
"And for that, we should fall at your feet?" I stared at her, at this woman who never saw me as a daughter-in-law, only as labor. My throat was tight, and my eyes stung, but I refused to cry. Not in front of her. I walked out of the kitchen. I needed air. I needed to breathe. As I crossed the hall, I tripped. 1 second I was standing. The next I was falling. I felt my foot twist on the uneven rug. My body tipped forward. My arms instinctively reached out. But nothing could stop the fall. I hit the floor hard. My belly took the shock. A sharp, blinding pain shot through me. And then, darkness. When I woke up, everything was blurry. There were voices. Panic. A stretcher. A hospital ceiling moving above me. My ears rang. But the only thing I heard clearly was my heartbeat and the aching silence inside me. Where was my baby? I turned my head slowly and whispered, "My baby?" No one answered. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. A nurse pressed something cold into my arm. My vision dimmed again. The last thing I saw was my husband standing at the foot of the bed, blank-faced, like he wasn't even sure what he was doing there. Later, I woke up in a hospital bed. Tubes in my arms. Beeping machines beside me. And a terrible, awful hollowness in my womb. I turned my head. A doctor stood by the door. My husband sat in the chair, scrolling through his phone. "Where's my baby?" I asked again. The doctor looked at me with eyes filled with caution and sadness. "You had a placental abruption," he said gently. "We tried everything, but the baby didn't make it." I stopped breathing. No screams came. No tears. Just silence. The kind of silence that swallows you whole. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. 3 long, suffocating days in a sterile white room where the beeping of machines mocked the silence in my belly. Nurses came in and out, checking vitals, adjusting drips, offering soft words.
None of it mattered.
Because nothing could bring my baby back. The baby I carried. The baby I dreamed about. The baby I protected.
Gone.
People say grief comes in waves. Mine came in silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry like I thought I would. I just stared. At the ceiling. At the 4 bag. At the door. And when my husband finally decided to speak, his first words weren't, "I'm sorry." They were. The doctor said, "You should be more careful. Why didn't you watch your step?" That was the moment I realized. He didn't just lose a child. He lost nothing. He hadn't felt the kicks at night. He hadn't written letters to a baby growing inside him. He hadn't sacrificed his body, his breath, his life for 7 months. I had. And now I was alone in my grief. His mother visited once. She stood at the end of the bed with a plate of fruit, placed it on the table, and said, "Don't think too much about it. These things happen. You're still young." I didn't respond. She added, "But next time, take better care. We warned you not to be lazy. If only you had listened." Next time? As if my baby was a dish I had ruined by forgetting salt. As if I was the mistake. That night, when they left, the nurse brought me soup. I didn't eat it. She sat beside me, held my hand and said, "You didn't lose your child because you were careless. You lost your child because you were neglected." I broke. I cried into her hands, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Finally, someone said it. When I was discharged, I expected things to change. I thought maybe, just maybe, the tragedy would crack something open in them. Maybe they'd realize what they had done. Maybe they'd treat me with care. I was wrong. The day I returned, my mother-in-law asked, "When will you start cooking again? The boys have been eating outside." My husband said, "You've rested enough. Try to get back to normal." Normal? What even was normal now? My body felt like a grave. My womb an empty cave. My heart was dragging itself forward, but it hadn't healed. It hadn't even begun to. Still, I got up. I made tea. I served food. I swept the floor. And that night, in the dark of my room, I whispered to the silence inside me. They don't know what they've done, but one day they will. Something in me died, with my child, but something else began to live. Not rage, not revenge, something quieter,
Sharper.
awakening. In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost through the house. They spoke around me like I was furniture. They laughed at the TV. They made plans for dinner, as if a life hadn't been lost, as if I hadn't nearly died with it. But I watched. Every word, every look, every small cruelty. And I remembered. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even touched the sky yet. The house was silent. The kind of silence I used to fear. But now I welcomed it. I stood in front of the mirror. My face was pale, hollow, but there was something new in my eyes. A steadiness. A fire that had stopped asking for warmth and had started creating its own. I looked at myself and said softly, "You don't need to be seen by them anymore." Because I finally understood. Begging for love in a place where hearts are locked is like shouting into a storm hoping it'll listen. I had begged enough. Begged for him to notice. Begged for his mother's approval. Begged for rest.
For care.
For softness. Not anymore. That day, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't sweep the floor. I didn't ask what they wanted. Instead, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea I made for myself, watching the sky change color. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. My mother-in-law came out, surprised. "You're just sitting?" I looked at her, really looked, and then I answered calmly,
"Yes,
I am." She blinked, confused, maybe even slightly alarmed. She was used to my silence, but not this kind of silence. Not this calm resistance. She left without another word. I started doing small things for myself. Brushing my hair slowly. Playing soft music in my room. Reading again. I reopened my journal, the one where I used to write to my baby, and I wrote, "I will still live, little one. I will still become something. Not for them. Not even for your father. But for you. For me." And the more I wrote, the stronger I felt. The more I listened to myself, the quieter their noise became. I didn't announce my rebellion. I didn't shout or throw things. I simply stopped waiting for their permission to exist. And that, somehow, shook them more than any scream ever could. They say healing is invisible at first. Like seeds pushing through soil, silent, hidden, but unstoppable. That was me. Days passed.
Weeks.
I didn't make any grand announcements. I didn't scream for attention. I simply changed. I started going on walks in the morning. Just around the block, slowly at first. I'd wrap a dupatta around myself, tie my hair back, and feel the breeze on my skin. For the first time in months, I noticed the birds, the smell of flowers, the laughter of school children rushing past. I was still grieving, still aching, but I wasn't broken anymore. I was rebuilding, brick by invisible brick. One morning on my walk, I ran into an old classmate from college, Priya. We hadn't spoken in years. She blinked in surprise. "Oh my God, you look different." Glowing.
I didn't know what to say.
I didn't feel like I was glowing, but something in her eyes was sincere. She asked if I was working. I shook my head. You should. You always had the spark for design, remember? You used to draw our project covers so beautifully. I smiled, genuinely for the first time in a long time.
Design.
I hadn't thought about that in years. That night, I pulled out my old sketchbook. Covered in dust, pages yellowed. But when I opened it, I saw pieces of myself still alive in the lines and curves. And I drew again. Not to prove anything. Not to please anyone. Just to breathe. My husband began noticing the change, too. But not with admiration, with discomfort. One evening, he asked, "What's going on with you lately? You're different." I looked at him. This man I once loved so deeply, who had become a stranger in my storm. I said, "I'm just learning to love myself again." He stared at me, confused. "So, you think you don't need us now?" I smiled. I think I never did. I only thought I did because I had nothing left. He didn't know what to say. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking him to see me. I wasn't asking anyone to. The next week, I applied for a freelance design job Priya had told me about. Nothing big, just catalog layout work. But when I got it, I cried. Happy tears this time. That night, I cooked a meal for myself. Just for myself. Paneer, soft rotis, and cold mango juice. I lit a candle, ate alone, played soft music, and I felt peaceful. Not because my life was fixed, but because I was finally mine again. I didn't fight with them. I didn't raise my voice. But the way I no longer lowered it shook them more than anything ever had. There's a strange fear that comes over people when the woman they used to walk over stops kneeling. It began with small shifts. I stopped jumping to their commands. I stopped apologizing when I said no. I stopped asking if they were okay with the way I lived my life. And it unsettled them. One afternoon, my mother-in-law knocked on my door, holding a basket of laundry. "Can you iron these by evening?" she asked.
I didn't even look up from my sketch pad.
"I'm working," I replied calmly. Her brows furrowed. "You mean like a real job?" I nodded.
Yes.
"Real clients. Real money." She scoffed, trying to hide the sting. "Well, that's nice, but the house still needs running." I finally looked at her. This time, there was no bitterness in my eyes, only calm truth. This house didn't care when I collapsed. It didn't care when I lost my child. It didn't care when I was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding and alone. So, no, I don't owe my life anymore. She didn't have a reply. My husband grew colder. He started coming home late, ignoring me, throwing passive-aggressive comments like daggers. "You're acting brand new, aren't you? You've changed. Don't forget where you belong. You wouldn't survive a day without us." But the thing is, I had survived. I had survived the death of my baby. I had survived their indifference. I had survived them. And every time he tried to pull me back into the mold of the woman he once controlled, I let the silence answer. Not weakness.
Not fear.
But the kind of silence that says, "I don't belong to you anymore." One day, during lunch, his cousin made a joke about wives being more obedient before marriage. Everyone laughed. But I didn't. I stood up, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "If obedience is the price for being treated like a human, you're buying loyalty with cruelty. And the bill has come due." No one laughed after that. They began to whisper about me, calling me arrogant, rebellious, disrespectful. But I wasn't any of those things. I was just awake. I was done shrinking. Done folding myself into boxes to make them comfortable. Done begging for a love that was never real. And slowly, I began to think about the future. My future. A future where I didn't just survive, but thrived. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's daughter-in-law. But as me. The day I left wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches or thrown bags. Just stillness. A quiet strength. And a woman who had finally remembered her worth. It happened after one of his usual outbursts. He came home angry, maybe from work, maybe from his own failure to control me, and slammed the door. He saw me on my laptop designing and snapped. "You're embarrassing this family. You think clients care about you? They'll throw you away just like you were thrown into this house." And for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just closed my laptop and stood up. I looked him in the eyes and said, "The only embarrassment here is how I let you think you could break me for this long." He stood frozen, stunned by the stillness in my voice. No rage, no fear, just truth. That night, while the house slept, I packed one small suitcase. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally walking toward myself. I left behind the clothes they bought me, the jewelry that was only ever meant to weigh me down, the roles they wrote for me. I took only what was mine, my laptop, my sketchbooks, my strength, and I walked out. No tears, no goodbye, just one last look at the house that buried me alive, and then I let it go. I stayed with Priya for a while. She welcomed me like family, like a sister. Her tiny flat was loud, messy, alive. We cooked dinner together. We laughed until 2 a.m. And for the first time in years, I felt human again.
Free.
I worked late nights on design projects. Clients praised my creativity. I began building a name, not just as a freelancer, but as a woman who rose from ashes with grace. My husband tried to call. My mother-in-law sent messages, pretending to care. They tried guilt, shame, even anger. But I never replied, because I had finally chosen me, not their version of me, not the wife they could mold or the daughter-in-law they could overwork. Just me, a woman who once collapsed from the weight of their expectations, now standing taller than they could ever reach. And then one afternoon, I signed my first big contract. A magazine wanted my designs. My name would be printed in glossy ink. I looked at the signed paper, smiled, and whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." Some stories end with a wedding. Mine began with one and was reborn after I walked away from it. A year had passed since I left. I lived in a small but warm apartment, walls covered with framed sketches and soft fairy lights. I made my morning chai while listening to music I loved. I worked with clients from cities I'd never visited, creating art that carried pieces of my soul. I was no longer a wife, no longer a daughter-in-law, no longer their shadow. I was simply me, and it was enough. One day, I got a message from someone unexpected. It was my ex-husband's cousin, the one who used to mock me at the dinner table. "I saw your designs in the magazine. You've really made a name for yourself. They don't stop talking about you at home. Funny how they only learned your worth after you stopped trying to prove it." I stared at the message for a moment and smiled. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to reply, because I had already moved far beyond needing their recognition. I was no longer surviving to prove them wrong.
I was living to prove myself right.
I often met women at workshops, some who were just like I once was. Hesitant, quiet, apologizing for existing. And I'd tell them, softly, "You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not wrong for walking away from pain. You are not weak because you broke. You're powerful because you healed." They would cry, hug me, and then start healing, too. I never remarried, not because I was bitter, but because I was whole. If love comes again one day, it'll be a bonus, not a rescue. But I never needed saving. I just needed reminding that the girl who once collapsed in pain was the same woman who now stood on stages and told her story like poetry. And sometimes, late at night, I'd whisper to my little one, the one I lost but carry in my heart, "You made me a mother, and in losing you, I gave birth to myself, too." I know my child watches over me, smiling, because their mother didn't just survive. She soared.